Welcome to the 42nd Annual Langston Hughes Festival. My name is Dr. Vanessa Valdez. I'm the director of the Langston Hughes Festival and the director of the Black Studies program here at the City College of New York. We are thrilled this day to honor Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. You have joined us for our symposium this afternoon. We will be going till about 2:30, and I will now introduce our moderator, Bobby Derival, who is the Executive Director of CCNY's Masters of Public Administration program.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you all. I've been reflecting myself on the first time that I heard Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. I believe, and don't quote me here, that it was in a PBS interview. I was awestruck. My conceptions of Blackness and the power of the spoken word to evoke reflection and spur action was never the same. For a Black boy growing up in the suburbs of Long Island, Michael Eric Dyson was a rare kind of intellectual force. His unapologetic and provocative existence gave me permission to find my authentic self. I geek out over books, grammar, and syntax, and I can credit most of that to Michael Eric Dyson. As many of you know, Michael Eric Dyson is a paragon of both style and substance. His critiques span race, Black feminism, politics, culture, music, spirituality, and so much more. Today, I'm honored to moderate a star-studded panel of educators, Michael Eric Dyson mentees, and visionary voices. And most of all, I'm excited to participate in this event with you, our audience. Together, we uplift and celebrate the life and work of this year's Langston Hughes Festival honoree, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. So over the next 40 minutes, you will hear from our panelists, after which we will engage in a group conversation followed by Q&A. And finally, remarks from Michael Eric Dyson himself. I encourage our audience to please feel free to post questions or praise in the chat. Now, let's just jump right in. Kicking off our panelist presentation is Dr. Brittney Cooper. Dr. Cooper is an author, professor, activist, and cultural critic. Her work delves into topics of intersectionality, African-American culture, and hip-hop feminism, and explores the manner in which public Black women have theorized and operationalized racial identity and gender politics. When asked about Dr. Cooper, our honoree, Michael Eric Dyson, said this: "Cooper might be the boldest young feminist writing today." Dr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you to all my esteemed panelists, who I am also very thankful to call my friends. When I heard that we had the opportunity to give a tribute today to Dr. Michael Dyson, I couldn't miss it. And so I just want to jump right in with my remarks. And I'm not prone to being emotional. My friend Joan Morgan will tell you that I try to love on people through the things that I write about them. Although today I feel like I might be emotional because I had the opportunity to really reflect on what you have meant to me in my career, Dr. Dyson. So I like to call these remarks the prophetic funk of Michael Eric Dyson. I've been a student of the work of Michael Eric Dyson for over half my life. I think I first learned of him when he used to preach at the Andrew Rankin Chapel at Howard University when I was a student there. Or perhaps I saw him on CNN first making complex words and ideas sound cool. What I remember, what my homegirl reminds me of perennially at this point, is the day I told her in the year I took off between college and grad school while we were both watching Michael do his thing on the TV one day, that what he was doing was the thing that I wanted to do, that I wanted to be able to speak with that level of clarity and precision and passion and erudition in ways that inspired Black people and represented the best of our community. Michael blends the best of the Black prophetic and Black intellectual traditions in a fierce, indefatigable, and unapologetic defense and accounting of Black life, our joys, our pains, our struggles. No public scholar of Black life has been more prolific than he, with the exceptions perhaps of W.B. Du Bois and Bell Hooks. It will be impossible to understand the story of the late 20th and early 21st century Black life without becoming a student of Michael Dyson, a man who is as deft in his treatment of Baldwin and King and Malcolm X as he is in his treatment of Jay-Z and Nas and Tupac. In these days of a revanchist Republican regime, I return often to a question Michael asked and grappled with in Holler If You Hear Me, his biography of Tupac Shakur. But do the Lord care? It is Michael who was perhaps my first model of what it meant to be unapologetically Black church and unapologetically a critical thinker and theorist of Black life, one who refused the epistemological gates of academic spaces, recognizing that our people did their best thinking often elsewhere and certainly outside those ivory walls. It is the habitus of the prophetic, a prophetic structure of feeling that shapes all of Dyson's work. A young boy shaped profoundly by news of the death of Martin Luther King, Dyson does not stray from confronting America with the hard truths of racism, continuing over nearly 3 decades to tread the stony road, seeking to cultivate good ground for honest conversations about race. In this, you find the prophetic. In his insistence during his time as a Baptist pastor of ordaining women as deacons, even after they locked the doors of the church on him, you find a refusal of exclusionary Black community structures, a willingness to put his job on the line for the principles he holds dear, a testimony that was critically pivotal and important to this young Black woman who had never heard a Baptist preacher say feminist things from a pulpit until I heard Michael Eric Dyson do it. In the characteristic mix of jocularity that you find anytime he spits bars with the best cats in hip hop, and also the plaintiveness of his accounting of Black pain, you find the improvisational spirit of funk, the P funk on a good day, that G funk on a bad day. And by P funk, I don't mean Parliament Funkadelic, although that's probably some of this, but I mean his prophetic funk, his professorial funk, his pastoral funk, his poetic funk, his prolific funk. His is work that meets us on multiple registers. His work sits in the heart of the contronymic principles. He means and he leans in at least 2 different directions. So, Michael, that's a hat tip to you because you gave me a hard time about contronyms, but I get that you are fundamentally, on most days, contronymic in the sense that you are simultaneously and at all times moving ahead of us, 2 steps to 5 steps ahead of the best of us. Funk is contronymic. It is contronymic in the sense that the goodness of Black badness moves in seemingly competing directions, but always with a singular point of elevating Black joy, pain, struggle, and the centrality and depth of Black life. The fugitivity made evident in the way that you can never fully apprehend Michael intellectually or culturally, generally, because he is for sure, even though it is an overused term, playing chess, and the rest of us are playing tiddlywinks. He sees where we should be going. He hopes for our future, but he knows we won't get there if we can't tell the truth, if we can't listen to the song cry, if we can't sit with our shit. This is the prophetic spirit that makes his work so integral. And so I have been thinking as I prepared these remarks about what an intellectual history of Michael Eric Dyson might proclaim, what it might include, what it might conclude. And I don't know that I have the answers to that because thankfully you are alive and well and passionate and still writing your story. But what I do see through an accounting of the 23 books you have written is that across now 4 decades, Michael has created new frameworks for African American cultural criticism, has helped us to understand the most charismatic of Black male figures, and has helped us to think very robustly and without and unflinchingly about hip hop, what it means, what it offers to us, and where it might grow. In the 1990s, you helped us to make sense of Malcolm. You helped us to make sense of the Black church and its relationship to gangster rap, to the blues and to the hood, into the spiritual, to the flimsy divide between the sacred and the secular. You helped us to position and understand ourselves. You spoke into the aspirational discourse of race in the 1990s by making clear what the actual rules really were. In the first decade of the 21st century, you used King as the anchor point, both beginning and ending the decade with books about Dr. King, offering him to us as a critical guide to a new century of racial politics, one that was destined to relitigate the politics of the King era. That decade also saw you grappling deeply with class divides in Black communities in Is Bill Cosby Right and Come Hell or High Water, a book that meant a lot to me, both because, as I feel about all of your titles, the title was just so perfect, but also that meant a lot to me because I am a Louisiana native. The 2010s, interestingly enough, began with Nas and ended with Jay-Z. And I think we'll still make sense of what that arc has meant. But it also was the decade that you called the country most fiercely to account for its refusal to fulfill the promise of including Black people, for its failure to fulfill the promise of what the Barack Obama era portended. And now you begin your fourth decade of prolific production, reminding us that the struggle continues, reminding us that Black temporalities don't even make sense, are not even comprehensible in the grand schema of a white freedom project, reminding us that Black freedom is a long time coming. But the thing that I feel, having not yet read your book, because it's not yet out, but that I hear in the title, that I hear against the backdrop of it, set against your larger body of work, is the sense that in your prophetic funk, in your accounting, your unflinching, unrelenting, unadulterated, uncompromising accounting of who we can be, if only our country would reckon with us, and if only we would fully love every deep and funky and bluesy and hip hop gangster spiritual thing about ourselves, is the sense that you have hope. And you are one of the first feminist prophetic preachers that I got to hear in my life. And so even when you don't know it, and even when you're not moving in it, you are still a pastor to me. You might not know that I am a newly licensed Baptist minister. And so you are a model in so many ways of what it means to love our people, to love them publicly, to love them unapologetically, to give white people the business, to outshine everyone in the room. But finally, every white person, I mean, but finally by doing that while elevating other Black folks. The thing I want to end by saying is that your generosity, Michael, you know, your willingness, even in the midst of your own greatness, to make space for newer generations of scholars. None of you know that I met Dr. Dyson in an airport. We had met on the set of the Melissa Harris Perry show in 2015, and months later I saw him in the airport in Minneapolis. And he said, "Do you have an agent?" And I had been talking to his agent, though he didn't know it, but he wrote her a glowing letter of recommendation about me as a way to help me to jumpstart my public writing career. And so my ability to do the kinds of things I do is indebted not only to the model that you have provided, but also to the doors that you opened and your willingness to put your name on the line for me. So I thank you for that, because I know that you have not just done it for me, but you have done it for so many others. And what we need in our intellectual traditions is not just scholars who are good on the page, but scholars who are good people in person. And I am deeply thankful for the ways that you model the love ethos of the many men that you write about in your work. Thank you.
Wow, so amazing and so powerful. Thank you for kicking us off, Dr. Brittany Cooper. We will now move on to our next panelist, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, who is the Steve Charles Professor of Media, Cities, and Solutions at Temple University, and has held positions at Columbia University and Morehouse College. Dr. Hill is an award-winning journalist, social justice activist and organizer, and a visionary voice on race, politics, and culture. Dr. Hill, a self-professed book nerd, hosts the Coffee and Books podcast and owns Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Books, a Philadelphia bookstore exposing underserved communities to a curated selection of books, workshops, and authors. I will also note that Dr. Hill just dropped his newest book, We Still Here, Pandemic, Policing, Protest, and Possibility. Dr. Hill, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bobby. And I'm gonna do my best to keep my composure as I think and talk about the legacy of Michael Eric Dyson. Um, uh, First, I ain't never going after Reverend Dr. Brittany Cooper on no panel, no kind of way, no kind of days ever again. I will set up chairs, I'll open up, I'll do what I got to do, but I ain't never going after her again. But she so brilliantly laid out so much of what I've been thinking and feeling. And I want to pick up on the one of the last points that she made, which was about the space that Michael Eric Dyson has made for folk. If I were to give this a title, I have to call it in Dysonian fashion, move, get out the way. Michael Eric Dyson as space maker. Let me start by talking about how Michael Eric Dyson has created space for the Black intellectual in our imaginations. The first time I met Michael Eric Dyson, I was a freshman at Morehouse College. I was like everybody who was 17 on a campus trying to figure the world out. And me and my best friend, R. LaRue Lewis McCoy, Doomy Lewis McCoy, were at freshmen at Morehouse College, and we went to a weekly event they have at Morehouse College called Crown Forum, where you had to go and sit in and listen to somebody talk about something that you probably didn't want to hear about, but you had to sign in and swipe your card. It's pre-computer. And so we sat there, and then we'd be bored, and then we'd leave as soon as we signed in. And this particular day, we were all sitting in King's Chapel, and we were at the Crown Forum, and we were feeling a little extra heavy, and we were feeling a little bit of extra pain. Tupac had died, and we were trying to figure it out. We were trying to understand what it meant for someone we admired so deeply, someone to whom we were so connected, could be gone so young. And this brother comes to the stage and offers not just a eulogy of Tupac's life, but an exegesis of his work, an analysis of his meaning to the world. He spotlighted the ways that our blind spots. He made it clear where we missed Tupac's genius and where we missed the intersections between Tupac and other folk. But he didn't just give an analysis of Tupac. He excavated these Western intellectual traditions and he made this stuff plain to us. And he was able, as Dr. Cooper said, to draw in vocabularies, not just fancy words, but vocabularies from and rhetorics from postmodern theory and from cultural studies and from the Black religious lexicon. But he did it in a way that was clear to us and legible to us as young Black men trying to figure this world out. And while he spoke to our souls, and as they say in Ezekiel, he spoke to the bones, he also challenged us to be different and better. He dared us to reimagine who we were as men in the world. He dared us to be self-critical about patriarchy. He demanded of us that we speak out against misogyny and patriarchy, not just within the music, but within our day-to-day lives. He forced us to rethink this whole thing. And at the end of that talk, when he was dropping gems and also spitting bars, as we know Mike does, we were like, yo, I turned to Doomy and said, I don't know what that dude just did. I don't know who that is, but that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. And for the rest of my life, I have attempted to try to follow in that tradition and in those footsteps, because before that, I didn't have a template. I didn't have an idea of what it meant to be a Black intellectual, a public intellectual, engaged intellectual, a Gramscian intellectual, a critical intellectual. I didn't have any idea of what that meant. I couldn't imagine it because I didn't have space in my imagination. And through his praxis, Mike wedged a room and created space in my imagination and the imagination of an entire generation of folk to understand what is possible. Then we start reading his work. I picked up Reflecting Black. And I had read some cultural studies. You know, I thought I understood Birmingham, but it was like Mike took that Birmingham and linked it to the Birmingham that my auntie and them was from. He was able to take these different vocabularies and meld them together. I was then able to understand what Black cultural studies could look like, as he would say, when baptized in the traditions and in the waters of the Black experience. Our rhetorics, our vocabularies, our traditions, our languages. Mike made me understand what was possible. But it wasn't just that he gave me a bridge to white people's theory, because that's what some folk do. He was able to say that our own texts, our own people, our own lives are able to be analyzed and are worthy of that type of critical analysis on our own terms. So when we're looking at Michael Jordan or Michael Jackson in postmodern theory, he's forcing us to rethink this, but he's also forcing Western postmodern theorists to reimagine their language and their vocabularies. That's a whole different thing. So when I read Reflecting Black, I was like, oh, this is something else. But then you got these critical texts and these deep analyses. Then you got these interludes where he's talking about Anita Baker and making me feel good about that, because now all of a sudden I don't feel alienated anymore. Because I'm like, I like Anita Baker. I like Mary Blige. I'm a little bit younger. I like Mary Blige too. I want room for that. But somehow the Academy didn't make me think that that was possible. Mike gave us permission to talk and think about a different, not just set of possibilities, but a new set of people. A new set of people. Mike is pushing back against not just a bourgeois humanist tradition that speaks out about high cultures being the refuge of intellect, of rigorous intellection and critical theory. He's also speaking out against their implicit claim, not just about the distinction between high art and low art, or good art and bad art, but about the capacity of particular types of people to produce it. But again, Mike wasn't just saying everyday people, Black folk, poor folk, brown folk have the ability to do stuff just as good as them. He was saying, let's move them out of the way, create space to center us. He centered us. He always centers us. Hip hop studies does not exist without Michael Eric Dyson. Michael Eric, the field of hip hop studies, all of us that do hip hop studies owe a conceptual debt to Michael Eric Dyson and Trisha Rose, to be sure. But those 90s were a moment where we needed room. Somebody had to create space to say hip hop was worthy of analysis. The brilliant, great Trisha Rose writes that first dissertation. We owe her a conceptual debt. But Michael Eric Dyson is also writing in Rolling Stone, in everyday venues, and he gives us Between God and Gangster Rap. He's forcing us to wrestle with this stuff in such a different way. And suddenly hip hop was worthy of critical analysis in the Academy. The brilliant Mark Anthony Neal and Murray Foreman published That's the Joint. We could have had 15 chapters just from Mike. That's how significant he is to the field. And maybe in a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, we will give him the credit he deserves for creating space for us to do the work that we do. He gave us space to move beyond the hagiographic. He allows us to not just analyze Dr. King and worship Dr. King, but to hold Dr. King accountable, to wrestle with his contradictions, not in a tawdry way, not in a way that's ambulance chasing like some of these intellectuals do, but as a means of uncovering a deeper level of humanity, as a means of letting us know that you don't have to be perfect, as he says, to be useful, as a means of letting us know that we can do what they do. Because if King is perfect and Rosa Parks is perfect and Du Bois is perfect and all these folks is perfect, then I can't do nothing. But Mike was saying to a group of people, one, we need to be intellectually honest. We need to tell the truth about what happened in history. We don't need to romanticize these folk, but also there's a political project at stake here as well, to say that we have to be able to understand that these folk were entirely human and you have the ability to be and do the same thing. In fact, you must. But that only happens if you excavate Tupac's life and understand him as an intellectual, not just as a rapper. It only happens if you understand that the conversations about King's intellectual honesty, as well as his what they would call moral transgressions, are part and parcel of his life as well. And he did Malcolm too. All these Malcolm books, we got to make sure that we don't leave out Michael Eric Dyson in the canon of Malcolm X scholarship, because before there is a Manning Marable text, or before or after there was that ridiculous Wolfenstein text, there is a Michael Eric Dyson text that tries to give us an analysis of Malcolm, a critical reading of his readers, an understanding of what Malcolm means in the context of that Spike Lee tradition in that film, which has its own contradictions. To have a conversation about Malcolm that is rich and nuanced and critical. Mike created space for that kind of thing. I meant to say Bruce Perry was the whack text. If I'm gonna do a drive-by, I just want to be precise and honest. All right, Mike created space for everyday people. Anybody who says writing a trade book is easy ain't never wrote one. there is a comfort and a convenience in using jargon, in writing in a prose that's impenetrable. But like Mike told me and Jesse Jackson told him, if you read that thing, if you write that thing and I can't understand it, that's a failure of your education, not mine. It is our responsibility to make sure that our books are accessible. In fact, the best way we can demonstrate our grasp of the knowledge, the genius of Michael Eric Dyson is that he grasps the knowledge so well. He understands the canon so deeply. He reads everybody's stuff, even when they don't read his, that he can make it accessible to everyday people. Now, it doesn't mean that he lets the reader off the hook, because that's also a mischaracterization of Michael Eric Dyson's work. People think that he's writing stuff sometimes, at least the haters are saying, and those are the ones who ain't read it yet, who think that he's just writing stuff that anybody can read. No, the reader has a responsibility to reach and stretch too. And Michael Eric Dyson forces y'all to do that. He forces us to do that. He writes in a way that everyday people can read it, but they still reaching for that dictionary. They still Googling. They still need to understand what those traditions mean. That's the genius of Mike. But it's not just a move. It's not a market move. It's not a neoliberal. I know that's like an academic tick now. We got to throw neoliberal in, so I'm going to do it for all of it. There's a way that they see it as some neoliberal consumerist gesture where it's for the market. No, that ain't what it's about. It's about making sure that everyday people have access to the ideas, because he believes that Black people deserve beauty as well. That everyday people deserve beauty, that everyday people deserve genius. Why should the Academy get all the smart people? Why should the Academy get all these complex ideas that are outside of your realm of understanding? No, Mike said it's in our realm of understanding, and I'm gonna prove it to you because I'm gonna give you 26 of these things in 2 decades. That's an entirely different type of commitment to everyday people and to poor people in particular. And it's not just because he writes books, it's because Michael Eric Dyson writes for poor people and on behalf of poor people. When it's so easy to beat up on Bill Cosby right now. Let me not say beat up. That it's so easy to rightly criticize Bill Cosby for all the awful shit that he does. It's easy because everybody's doing it. But when Michael Eric Dyson stood up and did it, as Brittany Cooper would say, when Michael Eric Dyson stood up and spoke out against Bill Cosby, wasn't nobody else doing it. I was there. I remember when people said, this guy is wrong. I remember when people said, you should be more nice. You should love him the way your pastor. I ain't gonna get into the specifics of it. I'm gonna just say, there's a whole lot of people that are beating up on Bill Cosby now that were defending Bill Cosby then. And Mike stood up against the odds. He was the voice in the wilderness that said, no, we got to stand up for poor people. Come hell or high water, we got to stand up for poor people. I'm gonna stand up against George Bush before Kanye. I'm gonna speak up about this thing before it's cool to do so. I know I'm gonna take my seat in a minute. Space for young scholars. We live in a field, we work in a field where so many of us are constantly looking in front of us and getting jealous, or looking behind us and getting arrogant. The Academy's filled with bitter people and jealous people, arguing over the smallest of things, the most trifling of matters. Mike never did that. When he looked behind him, it wasn't to say, I'm better than y'all, it was to say, come on up. It was to create space for young scholars. Mike is the one, like Brittany Cooper said, he's the one that'll pass you the agent. He's the one that'll write you the letter. He's the one that'll get you on the show. He's the one that'll pull you on the panel. He's the one that'll make sure that you get in the volume. He's not threatened by younger scholars. He wants us to stand on his shoulders so that we can be even taller and reach even higher, because he understands that it ain't about him, it ain't about us, it's about all of us. And so Mike creates that room, and that reflects a level of humility and a level of self-understanding and self-awareness that so many of us don't have. And so I'm grateful. And finally, he created space for me. When I got to Penn, I had nobody. I walked up to Mike and I said, can I TA for you? He ain't know who I was. He ain't know nothing about me. He said, I got you. The next semester, my department told me that I didn't have the aptitude to finish graduate work, and while they would allow me to stay in the program, they wouldn't fund me. Mike said, I got you. I got a note from the office saying, your fund, he said, Michael Dyson said he's gonna pay for it. He didn't ask for anything in return. When my parents have been sick, he's prayed with me. When I was at a low, he sat with me. When I had never been to a conference, he said, get your shit. We getting on this, how he talk. Get your shit, get on a train. And I went to Harvard for the first time to that Tupac conference, and I saw everything I need to know that the life of the mind was for me. I didn't know when I was at Morehouse and saw that man in the front that one day he would be my mentor and my teacher and my friend and my big brother. But he always created space for me. And it'd be easy to think that he did it because there was something special about me, but Mike did it because it was the right thing to do. He did it before he knew anything about me. He did it because that's how much he loves us. That's how much he loves this tradition. That's how much he loves the life of the mind. And that's why he is not just an incredible figure in my life, but one of the most important intellectuals this country's ever seen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. I'm the moderator and I'm not supposed to get emotional, but we are being moved, and it's just incredible to hear from these amazing esteemed panelists. Before we just move on, I just want to remind our audience to please use the chat feature and the Q&A feature for your questions. We will be pulling those questions later on in the Q&A portion. Our next panelist is Dr. Joan Morgan. She's an award-winning feminist author, a pioneering hip-hop journalist, and provocative cultural critic. Dr. Morgan, a Jamaican-born, Bronx-bred writer, is regarded internationally as an expert on the topics of hip-hop, the Caribbean, and gender. She's engaging, entertaining, and unabashedly thought-provoking, unafraid to explore the diverse realities and identities of young women and men of the African diaspora. Dr. Morgan, the mic is yours.
So I deliberately made sure that I didn't wear mascara because I knew that I was going to tear up today. Michael, I'm going to speak directly to you because I don't know you first through academia. And I hope that in what I say, I can provide an example, an intimate example of what Brittany and Mark expressed so clearly. I wrote a little book called When Chicken Heads Come to Roost. Michael knew me, I think, my work predominantly as a journalist. And when I wrote that book, I had this wide-eyed idea that I was going to be able to walk with my feminist foremothers, and that the work would be received in the spirit that it was written, because that work inspired me so much. Black feminism saved me in so many ways. And I wanted to make space for Black women who were really having a difficult time embracing that word. And I wrote the book specifically for Black girls who would never set foot in academia. So the language was specific, the topics were specific, and they were deliberate. And the reaction, let's just say that the doors of, I was not really given a seat at the Black feminist table. It took me many years to say that out loud. But the reception was chilly to, in some cases, brutal. I remember being at the Hip Hop Feminism Conference, the first one in Chicago. And two things happened. One was that I had had the experience of someone writing a book, an anthology on hip hop feminism, and inviting all the other Black women around me, scholars, PhDs, of which I didn't have one, to submit for the book, and never, ever being asked to participate in an anthology of scholars on what was my intervention. Again, these are things that I don't really say publicly. And the second thing that happened was that I was with Mark Anthony Neal and some other friends who happened to be male. And we went over to say hello to a table of, premier Black feminist scholars. And the reception to them was super warm. The reception to me was so chilly that they instinctively knew to guide me over to a table so they could sit and be with me and be my company. So I'd gotten a very clear message that when it came to Black feminism, within the context of the academy, my work did not belong. And then Michael invited me to come speak to his class at UPenn. Marc Lamont Hill was in the audience. And one of his students asked me after my presentation, who were my Black feminist intellectual mentors, who mentored me? And it was such an awful moment because I couldn't say anyone. And so I think I fumbled the answer and I said that I didn't consider myself an intellectual, that the work I did was very different. And Michael jumped in and cut me off, which you all know that he's apt to do. And he just gave this beautiful, beautiful answer for where my work fit, not just in the Black feminist tradition, but scholarship. And that I had every right to consider myself an intellectual. And that I had every right to have a seat at that table at Black feminism within the academy and without. And no one had ever done that for me. I am talking to you as Dr. Joan Morgan because I really believe had Michael not made that critical intervention that day, that I would never have attempted to go to grad school. I would never have graduated from NYU American Studies. And if he hadn't instilled the spirit of generosity to all of the scholars that you see seen here who played such a critical role in me getting through. Brittany Cooper jumping in and volunteering to do my bibliography for me 2 days before I had to defend. The morning that I had to have it in, Marc Lamont Hill staying up and reading my conclusion because we are all raised in the Dyson School of Generosity. When I have the privilege to teach, Mike, and when I have the privilege to publish academically, one of the sticking points with my committee, who I absolutely love, with publishers, is my insistence on the language that I use. That Black girl from the boogie, that Black girl from Jamaica who sometimes breaks it down in patois because I can't find another way to say it. That has to be there. And it is not there of an expression of my ego. It is because you taught me and gave me permission that my best intellectual work is when I can bring my entire self, all of those selves, into the room. I wrote my dissertation the way that I did, Michael, because when another brown girl like me is wondering whether she can do a PhD program, if the academy will make space for her, I need her to recognize herself in that prose, in the way that you do for so many of our people. You have taught me that in my pedagogy, when I am teaching, the most valuable thing I can do is to meet my student at the level of genius that they already possess, instead of beating them over the head about what they lack. I try very hard to pass on what you wrote for me. Thank you for that bomb recommendation that I know you wrote, because I'm not really sure that I would have gotten into NYU without it. You were really the only scholar at the time who I knew I mean, I had been executive editor at Essence. I could call on Susan Taylor, but I hadn't been in a classroom since 1987. You were the only scholar that I could call. I thank you so much for what you have taught me. I thank you so much for the way that you have made for me, for so many others. And I promise you that I will always pass that on. And I love you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. John Morgan. Duly minted Dr. John Morgan. Now we are going to move on. Up next, we have Dr. Mark Anthony Neal. Dr. Neal is the chair of the Department of African and African American Studies and the founding director of the Center for Arts, Digital, Culture, and Entrepreneurship at Duke University. He is the author of several books, including his seminal work, New Black Man. Additionally, Dr. Neal hosts the video webcast Left of Black, which is produced in collaboration with the John Hope Franklin Center at Duke. Dr. Mark Anthony Neal, please take it away.
Thank you, Bobby. Wow, I wasn't expecting the conversation to go where it has thus far, and I'm typically not an emotional person, but y'all folks got me on the edge. And let me just start by saying, one of the biggest tributes to Mike isn't just the folks who are here today, but where we come from, where Brittany comes from, where Mark comes from, where Tracy comes from, where me and Joan come from, that tenement building on Fulton Avenue in the South Bronx, where if you would have told us when we first met each other in 1969, that we would end up doing what we do and being able to pay tribute to someone like Mark Eric Dyson, we would have thought you were crazy. And for me, as a nappy-headed nigger from the South Bronx, whose daddy couldn't read, whose mom dropped out of school and got a GED, who C+ his way out of an undergraduate degree. So much of the reason why I'm here today is because of what was the example and the generosity of Mike Eric Dyson. Now, when I entered graduate school in 1991, to kind of set the scene for you, Do the Right Thing, Yusef Hawkins, Latasha Harlin, Fear of a Black Planet, Rodney King, Ice Cube, America's Most Wanted, Magic Johnson and AIDS, Michael Jordan. That was the world that I came into graduate school. And I made a decision really early on that I didn't want to have anything to do with 19th century African-American literature. I needed to find a lane to spoke to who I was, this cat from the South Bronx, who was always listening to Bring the Noise and Fear of a Black Planet and It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. I needed a graduate experience that could fit with that soundtrack. And it was a great moment because, you know, Cornell was on the radio and the TV, Cornell West. Bell Hooks was writing these incredibly accessible books without footnotes. Patricia Williams was doing her thing in The Nation. Manning Marable was being Manning Marable. But there was just something about them that I couldn't quite see in myself. And then I heard this cat, Mark Eric Dyson, on Talk of the Nation, fall of 94, 95, talking about Snoop Dogg and OJ. And I was like, who this dude? What is this? And we can joke now, you know, if there was an award for academic most likely to bust a rhyme, Mike has won that award 30 years straight. And there was always an authenticity to the piece that made it so important. And so I remember reading Reflecting Black. And again, like Mark was saying, going through the Birmingham School and talking about Stuart Hall and all these kind of Kobina Mercer. And yeah, we loved this stuff, but it wasn't quite what we were. And then Michael named it African-American Cultural Criticism. That essay on Michael Jordan, that essay on Michael Jackson, right? And again, these quick things from the Michael Jordan essay, where he talked about the will to spontaneity, the stylization of the performed self, the use of edifying deception. And we have all been decepting people edifyingly for the last 30 years because no one expected us to be up in this space doing what the hell we do. And Mike was our role model for that. And then we kept seeing the books roll out, Making Malcolm. I remember buying Race Rules in a Barnes and Noble in Pittsburgh before I was doing a conference at Carnegie Mellon when I was still in grad school. Beyond God and Gangster Rap. And of course, we now know the end part of this story because we all assume, well, you write a dissertation and you publish a dissertation, and you realize that this dude at this point had written 6 or 7 books and hadn't even published his dissertation yet. And of course, much later, we get the actual story of the dissertation where, you know, his committee approves him, right, to go forward to write his dissertation, and he pulls a shit out of his bag. And it's like, I'm done. This was a different kind of dude. But it was also about the generosity of spirit. And all of you have talked about this. I first met Michael, Xavier University, Louisiana, fall of 1996, my first professional gig at an HBCU. I was fortunate that they hired a colleague, Darnetta Bell, who was the sister of Vanessa Bell Calloway. And Vanessa Bell Calloway was shooting a series of some sort with Larry Hagman. Mike was coming down to speak at Xavier. He connected with Vanessa and her husband. There was a dinner I missed, but then there was a lunch the next day. And I'm always so thankful for Darnetta because Darnetta was like, I want to make sure you sit next to him because he needs to know who you are. And we sat there and we talked about Lil Willie John. We talked about hip hop. And the one thing he said to me that has stayed with me for 24 years, because I was a new academic, PhD, everything I wanted was to be able to teach at an HBCU. An HBCU at that point was already kicking my ass. And we won't even get into the fullness of that discussion. And Mike just goes to me, Black schools kill smart niggers. And I had to pause, right? Because I was still in that kind of moment, right? Like, you know, this is my life, right? This is what I've always wanted to do. And part of it for him was to talk about how conservative these spaces were. And we forget sometimes, a lot of these academic spaces, including HBCUs, weren't trying to fuck with anything called hip hop studies in the mid-1990s. They weren't trying to have people have serious conversations about gender and sexuality in the context of Black studies. If we're going to be real, with the exception of a few institutions, they weren't really trying even to fuck with Black studies in the mid-1990s. And what Mike was trying to remind me at that moment is that wherever you go, there will be Black students who need you, who need your intervention. And that was it. And of course, in those early days, you know, there was no internet. Some folks might have had some email, you know, there wasn't any Facebook or Twitter. If you wanted to catch up with folks, you either had to call them on the phone in their house, or you were stalking them. And I stalked Mike for a good 4 or 5 years. If there was some conference and I knew Mike was going to be there, I would make sure to show up and be there. And when I first met him at Xavier, you know, he gave his talk and he wanted to play some music. So, you know, I offered to bring this giant boombox from our apartment across the street so he could play some music. And, you know, it's like, you know, let me just give him a copy of my dissertation, right? Because back, you know how it is. You proud of my dissertation, you bind 5 or 6 copies of that joint and you handing them out on the street. So your mom got a copy and your auntie's got a copy. So I gave him a copy of my dissertation, right? Never expecting actually to hear from the dude ever again. I get a phone call that night, actually that morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. I hadn't given him my phone number, so he got it from someplace. Mike calls me 2 o'clock in the morning. And it's like, yo, I like this shit. And whatever else happened after that, my career was made. And there's so many other moments that we can all attest to about how Mike opened up a space for us. The time he spoke at my undergraduate alma mater, and I made the ride down to Fredonia with him. And as a gesture, because he knew it was the place that created me, that didn't really have much love for me, he asked me to share the stage with him to affirm who I was in the world at that moment. And if that wasn't enough, he split the honorarium with me. And it's like, and when I hear folks talk about Mike Eric Dyson, if they ain't got stories like that, I know that they don't know Mike Eric Dyson. And we often have to decipher between what is both hate, but also, let me say, fear. Remember a good friend of mine's, well-known colleague, who talked disparagingly about the work. And you also know that whenever people talk disparaging about the work, that means they ain't read shit. So you ain't read none of Mike's shit, just saw him on TV, but yeah, he done read all of your shit. Right, and it's hard, right? Because this is the thing, so many of us look at Mike and that's the life that we wanted, but Mike is such a unique figure. And we all figured out how to create our own lanes based off the world that he made for us. I'm thinking about reading, our man in a critique of Mike goes, this is the path blazed by Gates and West. He's talking about cultural studies. And Dyson, as usual, is bringing the best pig meat Markham meets Baudrillard act along behind. And I'm like, that's the reason why we love Mike. The fear of Mike is about the fact that he's doing something that is not easily done. That he's creating generations of folks who are redefining what this work is. That his willingness to connect with the people. How many times have any of us walked through an airport and just seen a random person reading a Michael Eric Dyson book? His willingness to commit and connect to the people is as much about rigor as it is love. When you read stuff from the late Stanley Crouch and Jason Whitlock, you realize that they hate Black youth. Mike was the intervention continuously over these last 30 years to say, not only should we love Black youth, we should look at them as a way for us to push forward into the future. And let's talk about the myriad of platforms. When he dropped that Bill Cosby book, there was a day that he started on the Today Show, and at some point was on the Bill O'Reilly show on Fox. He did NPR's Talk of the Nation. He did News and Notes with Ed Gordon when Ed Gordon was still with NPR, and then capped off the day, Blacker Than You Could Imagine, on Rap City. We ain't got no MFs in the house that got that kind of range. Redefining the game. And then lastly, when we talk about a brother being willing to be there, my baby girl turns 18 in 2 days. And like her older daughter, they were both adopted. And she was born when I was at the American Studies Conference in Houston, Texas in 2002, November 2002. And the adoptive mother gave birth and changed her mind about the adoption. And I remember my wife called to tell me the adoption is not going to happen. She's in New York, I'm in Houston, not knowing how I'm going to actually handle this shit. I was actually in a toy store at the time, right? Looking for a gift to bring back. And I called Mike. And that Mike, the Mike that will always call you back, that will always text you back, that will offer you some counsel, it was that Mike that I talked to, that gave me faith in that moment. And then 2 weeks later, right, the day before my birthday, we actually took that baby girl home. So, Brother Mike, I love you. I wouldn't do and be here without you. And I'm so glad we're able to give you the first of your flowers while you're still here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mark Anthony Neal. Our final panelist in the panelist presentation portion of this symposium is Dr. Tracy Deneen Sharpley Whiting. She is the Gertrude Conway Vanderbilt Distinguished Professor of Humanities, Chair of African American and Diaspora Studies, and Director of the Callie House Center. She is the author and editor or co-editor of 13 books. Dr. Deneen Sharpley Whiting's work provides expert commentary on race, racial profiling, hip hop culture and gender, consumer culture, and Black women's sexual politics. Michael Eric Dyson has described her as, quote, a rising star among Black public intellectuals and one of the country's most brilliant and prolific racial theorists. Dr. Deneen Sharpley Whiting, the floor is yours.
I don't mute myself there. All right. So it is wonderful, I have to say, being here with my esteemed colleagues. Some of you, of course, I have only met remotely in studios, and others, of course, like Joan and Mark, Anthony Neal, I've been on panels with, and we've had wonderful raucous nights together after those panels in interesting cities. So it is wonderful actually to be here celebrating Michael, who I've known since 1992. And I guess I could title my remarks Coming Full Circle. I had the honor of meeting Michael Eric Dyson in fall 1992. So I guess that makes me the oldest one with the longest connection to Michael. So I was a graduate student at Brown University in the Department of French Studies. And he was an assistant professor. So Brown was his first job. And I had been recommended to him by Professor Thaddeus Davis as a potential teaching assistant for his Introduction to African American Studies course. But there was a snag, as there always is in these things. I was already a TA in French studies, and so therefore couldn't teach in both units. So some interesting back and forth about monies and how that would go. And I remember being so excited when I first was told that, you know, I was going to be his TA, and I ran over, I didn't know who he was at all. And then he said, oh, the graduate school said that, you know, we can't do this because, you know, you're in this other unit. And so it was a little disappointing. So I left, and then later on I got a call, and he was like, no, we're going to strategize this thing. And so Michael and I presented the graduate school with a compromise, whereas I would be, you know, paid in the summer and use it as research money to go to France. And the rest, as they say, is history. I was allowed to become his TA, and it was a very rewarding experience. And so I got to see him, I got to see the younger Michael, as he wowed students with his intellect and his concern, even then as an assistant professor, giving inordinate amounts of time to the students, as well as the 3 TAs that he had at the time. But I believe in many respects that that moment mapped out where I find myself in my career today between 2 academic spaces, Black studies and of course, French studies. At Brown University, Michael and I bonded over being 2 Black folk, one an assistant professor, the other a graduate student and aspiring professor from the inner cities of Detroit and St. Louis, who loved the life of mind, but remained fully committed to the material culture, people, and experiences that ground us and shaped us in those cities. And so he was always the person that you could just simply talk to. And we had many, many, many discussions. But his mentoring didn't stop there. We debated ideas of race, and Michael offered books, dare I say, prophesied deliverance, among others. He, of course, would later serve on my dissertation committee. And over the years, he has served as a sounding board for many of my academic peregrinations. We continued our discussions over the years, and his prescient book, Come Hell or High Water, recognized the pandemics of poverty and racism, what one would call a syndemic, where two pandemics come together, much like where we are today with COVID and its fault lines along race and police brutality. For me, that book just moved me in an interesting way at a particular moment, of course, with Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath. And it was timely. And Michael, of course, had his finger on the pulse of the nation. He had certainly his finger on the pulse of Black folk at the time and our horror at what was happening in our country at that moment. I think though he awed me most recently, made me profoundly proud to be one of his students when I interviewed him for a podcast called Democracy Unchained. His essay, Race and Democracy, the Kennedys, Baldwin, Obama, Trump, and Us, contained in the volume produced by the podcast team, represents the best of Michael's erudition and the Jeremiah tradition. I'd like to cite from that moving essay, so if you could bear with me as I bring up the rear. And he writes, recently, as bigotry resurfaced in Charlottesville, the lie is put to the belief that this is not America, this is not us, when indeed it truly is. We do not want to acknowledge how true it is because of how it makes us look complicit in prejudice we thought we had gotten over. Donald Trump is far more representative of the nation than many whites would like to admit. But there's a development with Trump that is unique. He is treating the nation, which by default is white and Christian, though technically it is neither, as white folks have treated Black folks throughout history. Trump is treating the entire nation as Black. More particularly, he is treating the entire nation as the nigger. One of the reasons for the special outrage of many white Americans toward him is that he has forgotten the rules. That sort of treatment is for Black folks, the others, not whites. That need not be conscious belief for it to be true. The reason his views on immigration can be abided is because those immigrants are them. However, when it comes to insulting folks, spoiling his office in narcissistic displays, acting vengefully, which we are of course privy to at this particular moment, this is the heart of whiteness and the force of whiteness against Blackness and other colors. It has always been a rather juvenile affair. Drinking at a white water fountain was not simply a marker of rigid, though unscientific anthropology. It was the symbolic height of adolescent bravura and competition. Mine is better than yours. Except such displays are rigged from the start to favor petulant whiteness. It is unbearable for white America to tolerate Donald Trump because he is treating them like they treated us. In short, he's confused his pronouns. If they could abide the language and grasp the comparison, many whites would cry out with James Baldwin, "I am not your nigger." And that's the end of that passage. And it moved me to almost tears when I first read it, when I read the essay in its entirety, but that particular passage. And he had just latched onto something. Of course, we're at another moment now, but again, it represents Michael's kind of prescience and his understanding of where we are as a nation. But on a more personal note, of course, as I've said, he's been there for me, as he's been there for many of my colleagues on this panel. When I needed him most, certainly closest of my mentors, one who I know who has my best interest at heart, one who I could turn to when things really got tough, when I needed a confidant, when I could relate certain things that I didn't expect to be repeated, one who you could confess one's insecurities about where you might stand on a particular precipice of publication and what the implications might be. And Michael was always there to tell you to go forward, do it, take that chance, take those risks. So let me conclude by saying, I was delighted to be able to recruit him to Vanderbilt University this year. And so we've come full circle. Thank you.
Wow, this has just been like the last incredible amount of the outpouring from Michael Eric Dyson has been incredible. Thank you, all panelists. We are now moving into kind of the conversation portion. So if panelists can please turn on their cameras so that we can kind of participate in a group conversation that, of course, I hope will be directed by you all. For our audience members, I actually saw in the chat that there were 2 hands raised. If you could please just put whatever questions you have in the Q&A section. That's at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A icon. If you could just put your questions in the Q&A so that we can pull those and introduce those to the conversation. I was taking notes down from a lot of what you all were saying, and you know, just being able to just hear these reflections on your own personal experiences with Michael Eric Dyson, but also contextualizing that in what he means to a whole movement of people and a whole movement of academics. One of the things that for me, you know, shines brightest when I either read or hear Michael Eric Dyson is his wordsmithing. He is a master with words, and you know, a lot of you all talked about that. It's funny, if I could just do a short reading, kind of just piggybacking off of you, Tracy. This was in response to using slang in his oration. Michael Eric Dyson has stated, "We know dangling participles, gerunds, and the like, but African-American English vernacular articulates deep and profound philosophical sensibilities that are exhausted in the infinite capacity of speaking to the king's English and to the queen's taste." And something he actually recently said it when he was speaking with Heather McGhee. My kind of just opening up to you all, what are your favorite passages? What are your favorite lyrical raps that Michael Eric Dyson has kind of thrown out? And anyone, you know, feel free to kind of just jump in and just tell me how you feel about the words that Michael Eric Dyson strings together.
Is this a public or private stringing together words?
I think we're in a great, safe family space right now.
Oh.
I mean, I revisited, I mean, part of the problem, Michael, I mean, so many books, like there's no, I mean, you just, you know, we can't keep up, but I revisited April 4th, 1968. And that book is just so lyrical and it's, you know, I mean, I don't, you know, it's not, you know, I just read it and I thought, I don't know how you make these words sing this way on the page and still feel accessible and still feel so beautifully rendered about such a hard topic. So that's, you know, more recently the work I've been thinking about, but I actually have a funny version of this. So when I was doing my PhD at Emory, Mike came through to give a talk at Emory, and this was at the height of the 50 Cent era, and PIMP had dropped. And so he like gets in the pulpit, he does this whole riff, and he, you know, he keeps on, you know, he keeps saying, "I'm a PIMP." And I can't remember all of them, but one of them I remember is he was like, "I'm a preacher interested in making people." And I was like, wait a minute. Like, and then, you know, he sort of goes on and it's like, "I'm a prophet interested in whatever, I'm a poet interested in whatever," right? So he sort of riffs on PIMP, and that was the kind of stuff that just made crowds go up for Michael, both because it's, you know, right in the heart of what people are thinking and talking about, what they're dancing to in the club. It also is edgy because he's saying it from a church pulpit, and, you know, why is a preacher, you know, calling himself a pimp? But then when you know anything about Black Baptist preachers, then it's probably actually more consistent to think about their own relationship to pimping than to not think about it, right? Not Michael's relationship. I mean, preachers more generally. And, you know, so that kind of artistry, even as I was like trying to get the degree so that I could do a version of the thing Michael does, you know, there are so many moments when I listen to Michael, particularly as a younger scholar, and I just thought, oh, you can do that? But the thing was, before he did it, you couldn't do it. It couldn't be done. And then he did it. And then you realized who he made space for. And so that's one of my funnier moments. But the other thing that I think as I read Michael is, I don't know how you write like archivally, sociologically, like the level of citation, the reading across so many different fields in the work, you know, because I'm like, to do some of this historical work that you've done over the last decade in particular is like, deep sort of archivally rooted kind of stuff, and then and then to be able to like riff into the sort of pop culture archive in particular ways. As a person who both writes among a different range of registers and tries to train students to do it, it's just no simple feat. And then to be able to render it on the page as beautifully as you do is, I just, you're still goals. And and I thought today, Outkast is like my favorite rap group. Andre 3000 is like my favorite MC. And and the thing is, people are like, well, why did Andre stop making music? And I was like, because ain't nobody caught up yet. And so I consider it like a supreme gift that you continue to write. Because when I read you, and having read you over these decades, what is clear to me is nobody's actually caught up to you yet, right? You continue to sort of set the standard for where we ought to be going and how we ought to be thinking. And, so the fact that you haven't gotten bored with the rest of us is a testament to your generosity.
I just want to add to that quickly, because I think this is a collection of writers, right? Everybody here has word game and skillful with the pen. But Michael is really, and I say this from the bottom of my South Bronx heart, a true MC, because a true MC is able to battle and just go off the head. So there are the things that Michael has written, but if you have ever had the privilege of just seeing him get on a mic, and I'm not just talking about in academic settings, like I've seen him do this at like the Essence Awards, and just spit off the head. He is a true MC. And I think that in this moment, that really has to be acknowledged, because that capacity for improvisation is at the heart of the measure by which we judge the strongest hip hop, our most capable of griots. And Michael certainly fits into that category.
There have been numerous occasions, at least 2 or 3 occasions, where I've been with Mike right before he's given talks and literally heard him say, "What am I talking about?" And literally then just walk on stage and kill it for an hour and a half. On topic, on point, all of those things. But you were mentioning passages, Bobby. So I got one that got sent to me from our agent, Tanya McKinnon, from Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America, and particularly this line: "It's not a question of simply not saying nigger. You have to stop believing, no matter what, that Black people are niggers and all the term represents. Instead, you must swim in the vast ocean of Blackness and then realize that you've been buoyed all along on its sustaining views of democracy." That's what we call, right, a Mike Eric Dyson moment.
A mic drop.
A mic drop, absolutely. Bars. That's what you got, Mike. You got bars.
That is awesome. Bars. No, that's incredible. As we kind of shift in, I think, one of the themes that you all have excavated about Michael Eric Dyson is how he deals with Black culture and Black music specifically, right? And it appears that, so much of your work is so steeped in a hip hop tradition or a Black musical tradition that, of course, is rooted in all previous Black musical traditions. And so I just want to get a sense of, he's written about Marvin Gaye, Tupac, Jay-Z, Nas. I wonder if any of you can speak to how Michael Eric Dyson's use of music as a cultural artifact has informed your own work, and more specifically, your own critical perspective.
He'd be the most celebrated Black music critic of this generation. And the fact that he actually hasn't, even with the Marvin Gaye book and with Tupac and Jay-Z and Nas, I don't think he's actually done a music book yet. Right, that's kind of like a background. There's a musical feeling, sensibility to everything he writes, right? There's a musical flow to his writing. But I think given his deep archival knowledge of the music and his ability to tap into what the music made him feel and what he could see how it impacted other folks, I won't even go into the discussions we've had of an R&B singer that no one can utter his name anymore. But it was really in conversations with Michael that I got a fundamental understanding about the richness of the tradition that this particular figure was drawing from, no matter how problematic he actually might be, in real life.
I want to piggyback on what Man just said, because I think this is something that is really important about Michael's work that needs to be highlighted and elevated in this moment. We have this democratization of opinion because of social media. And that's the most generous way I can put it. The strongest, because remember, I come to being a cultural critic outside of academia first. You really are strongest as a critic when you write from the space of love and you critique it because you love it enough to care. So much of what passes for cultural criticism now goes straight for what you don't like, straight for what you want to rip apart. And you can tell by just the way that Michael crafts his prose, the musicality, the sheer attention to craft, that he loves Black music. He loves what he is writing about. And when you love, not fan and be uncritical, but when you love, really principally love the thing you write about, and then take the risk of critiquing the thing that you love, that is the magic in the work. And that is what Michael embodies.
Jonas, absolutely correct. I want to say that although it wasn't, like I said, Come Hell or High Water for me was the inspirational book, and then the essay, the recent essay, but the Tupac book was absolutely critical to some of the analyses that I put forward in the Pimps Up, Hoes Down book. As I was going through attempting to balance critique at the same time that you're, simultaneously appreciating the beauty of hip hop culture and trying to get a better understanding of Black men, their role in that culture, the space that they've kind of created an attempt to, and of course, Black women have created, but of course become marginalized within that space. And Tupac's own very complicated journey. And so that work was very, very important in my trying to walk that fine line between critique, as Joan just said, but simultaneously love and understanding. And I had another moment like that with Michael when we were on Pins and Needles about Michigan. Right. So I'm like texting him, what's up with your people? Right. And so, he writes back, we're going to get through, blah, blah, blah. So of course, it was coming from him. So I felt, it was a very inspirational text at the same time. We're going to break through, like Moses said, part 3, we're going to part this thing. And I was like, okay, but what's up with your people? And so he's like, we're going to get there. But, he delivered a critique. He was like, I'm a little, put off because these black men, right, have voted, voted even more for Trump. When we asked them to perform, they decided to overperform at this particular moment, right? But then he comes back and says, but one has to understand when you're dealing with marginalized communities, the way in which someone like Trump, the transactional nature of this presidency, how it could be appealing, right? And how, when Obama and Clinton came to Black folks, it was a lecture, right? Trump appeared to be offering something else. And so again, it was a critique, but it was also, the love thing. And so it was just in that moment, just last week when we were doing this texting back and forth. So I was getting all of this goodness just in a text. So it was fabulous. One for the, something you should publish, Michael, later on. It was nicely worded, I have to say, beautifully worded, as always.
I wanted to, 2 quick things. One, even to the first question, I think when I think about some of the most amazing moments of Mike's sort of rhetorical genius, part of it, of course, is the prose and the text. And again, they're lyrical. And for me, April 4th is Brittany said, is one of my favorite books in terms of its lyricality. The prose just sings, as does Tears We Cannot Stop. But my favorite moment was actually giving the Du Bois lectures, when Mike is giving the Du Bois lectures at Harvard. And for those who don't know, to do the Du Bois lectures, you have to people prepare months for the Du Bois lecture. It's 3 days of lectures, and it ultimately becomes a book. And he had prepared to do the Du Bois lectures on Jay-Z. And then November 4th, 2008, Obama becomes president. And he arrives on the campus the next day, and Mike reads the room. And he knew that Black folk loved them some Jay-Z, but they had them a whole Black president on November 5th, and they didn't necessarily want to hear about that. And most people would have postponed it or explained why they couldn't do that. But like Man said, Mike was like, nah, I'm gonna give y'all 3 days of these Barack Obama lectures. And the thing about improvisation within the jazz and blues tradition is that it's undergirded by extraordinary preparation. You prepare so that you can improvise, right? You can't just go up there and wing it. You got to know this thing before you can improvise. And his level of preparation and understanding comes from deep reading, wide reading, and extraordinary intellectual discipline. The second thing, to the question about the music, I think, again, I think there's a way to think about Mike, the musicality, not of Mike's content or subject, but of the prose itself. I'm not sure we had a clear idea. I mean, there are folk like Paul Beatty, of course, Kessie Lehman now is definitely writing in a hip hop kind of form, particularly invoking the South. But there's a way that we still trying to wrap our minds around what hip hop looks like as a prose. We know what jazz writers look like, right? But to think about what a hip hop writer looks like, and I think Mike offers the first and one of the most important examples of that. The other thing that I think, in terms of Mike's music writing, that I think is important is that early hip hop writing, and even later hip hop writing, unfortunately, has largely been textual. People read a text, they read a lyric, and they tell you what it means. They tell you why it's good, they tell you why it's bad, they tell you why it's affirming, they tell you why it's problematic. But it's all about close reading of text, which is an important thing. But what Mike did was he expanded the range of analysis. He shifted the unit of analysis so that we weren't just reading text and offering a kind of optimistic or pessimistic critiques of text, but instead he forced us to think about political economy of hip hop. He forced us to think about reception. In other words, what does this text mean in the day-to-day experiences or lived experiences of everyday people? Audience reception, as we would say in sort of cultural studies or in media theory. So what Mike did was, in hip hop, expand the realm of what we could study and how we could think about it. So those who are doing ethnographic analyses, those who are doing literary analyses, those who are doing political economic analyses of hip hop and music more broadly, because he's doing the same thing with Marvin. Owe a conceptual and methodological debt to Michael Eric Dyson.
Resonates with me, Mark. That's awesome. I want to pull an actual question that actually came in the Q&A, and it's actually targeting, it's a question towards the Black women professors on our panel. And this person asks, other than Why I Love Black Women, which of the books of Dr. Dyson's radiates or connects you to who you are now?
First of all, Why I Love Black Women is such a wonderful book. And also because Michael is slightly outrageous there, I just remember I'm be slightly bawdy and say there is a line about undulating hips of a lady in that book that I was like, wait a minute, Reverend Doctor, why? What's happening? I will never get it. So it's just such a sort of wholesale appreciation. I think we have to understand that book as a cultural intervention, and one that's fairly singular among Black men. I can't really think of another book by a Black male scholar or preacher that is like just a wholesale celebration, in a world where part of what we see is that brothers are always like just coming for Black women. But part of the thing that I also think reading Michael is that he doesn't, he both understands the need to affirm Black women, but he also takes Black women seriously as thinkers. So if you look at like What the Truth Sounds Like, which is a book that I'm also reading heavily right now because I'm working on a book where James Baldwin figures heavily. And so taking seriously Lorraine Hansberry and taking seriously Lena Horne and their contributions to this 1963 conversation that Baldwin has with Robert F. Kennedy, right? So, as a person who is deeply interested in the way that people take Black women seriously as intellectuals and thinkers or refuse them, that kind of treatment, this is a book that I think sort of classes them among the Baldwins, Belafontes, and others of the world, and talks about the criticality of their intervention. But I also will say something about this kind of critical praxis around gender that's in Michael's work. So in 2015, he wrote this blockbuster essay in the New Republic called like The Emerging Black Digital Intelligentsia or something like that, which and that essay was designed to both assess like a new generation of public scholars. It was designed to create a model for thinking about the digital in a way that, you know, indicated that it was significant to, you know, as a site of like doing Black intellectual work, and was really important. I was a junior scholar at that time. And so having Dr. Dyson like say in public, all of this thinking and theorizing that folks are doing on Twitter and doing on blogs and doing in online publications actually matters, and classes them among the long Black intellectual tradition matter, in part because he made specific choices in that essay to not just talk about the dudes, but to say, here are the sisters who are doing it. And so, you know, he shouted out folks like Salome Shatila, who's also one of his proteges, me and others, you know, and that intervention actually really matters in a tradition that has been so masculinist. And it's a nice balance because Michael likes to write about charismatic Black male leaders. And I think that, you know, in a world that is dominated in a sort of conversation about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, the great thing, if you read Michael, is that he doesn't write about them in a masculinist way though, right? And that's the influence of like Black feminists and Black gender theory, that the need to humanize them, the need to sort of think about them as complicated and complex and to not deify them, is like the intervention of folks who've been working in masculinity studies and working in, you know, Black feminist thought. So I think across the board, all of those things resonate for me as a Black feminist scholar. The way he treats Black men when he writes about them, the way he treats Black women when he incorporates them into a broader treatment of a story or a topic. And then his like very committed insistence that what we will not do is tell the story of 21st century Black intellectuals as primarily a story driven by Black men.
I think, you know, that book is published in the early 2000s, Why I Love Black Women, right? So I think that one of the things that it's sort of easy to overlook now is the drastically different space we were in the late 90s, early 2000s about our understanding and appreciation of gender and where Black women belonged in the conversation. Really, so I think that is really when we're having conversations about misogyny and hip hop and misogyny and Black female culture, misogyny was not even a word that like the average person even said, you know? I'm writing a book in 1999 trying to give Black women permission to call themselves feminists. So I think when we look at it 2020, it's easier to kind of say, okay, obviously that one, but which other one? But that book was monumental because of the position it took when it decided to take it. Nobody was really writing for us in that way. You know, you are just beginning to get Black men who are like calling themselves publicly feminist. And so it was really important. And there were also people, men, Black men, who thought the book was pandering, you know? The response was not like, oh, wow, look at these serious contributions by Black women, but like, okay, that he wrote this one to satisfy the bitches. That's what you got to do right now. And so I think that you can't really overlook the when and where that book enters, because it's so important about the position that Mike was frankly brave enough to take.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joan. You know, that brings to mind, for me at least, some of the themes that you have all spoken with, right? I was trying to jot down notes when each of you were speaking to see what characteristics or traits or qualifiers were you using to describe Michael Eric Dyson. And what I have is unapologetic, was used a couple of times. Space maker was used almost in every single panelist presentation. uplifter, and one of the other words that has been used time and time again, and I'm just kind of converting, interventionist, right? A lot of you all talk about his intervention into your own lives and into the lives of other academics. And what I'm going to try to do is weave a thread and get your reflections on this for actually a question that's in the Q&A that's actually directed towards Michael Eric Dyson. But I wonder if you all can reflect on this. The question is about, life being a marathon or a sprint. And specifically, the question is having to have so much strength and be as vocal as you are and need to be. But what do you do when you feel weak internally? Speaking of your spirit, to get that strength to keep moving. And it seems that Michael Eric Dyson has provided some booster cables for a number of the panelists here. And so I wonder if folks want to reflect on, when life is a marathon and you get weak, how do you recharge? And how has Michael Eric Dyson's work kind of helped further along your process?
For me, it's two things. One, there are moments where you take bold positions, and those positions are not rewarded, right? It's easy to do it when everybody's celebrating it. It's hard to do it when you're speaking against the grain. And the energy that I get to keep doing it, and I'm not special, we all do it, everybody up here does it, comes from, again, I think about that moment when Michael's writing against the arguments that Bill Cosby's making. I remember him being pilloried for it. I remember him not being uninvited, disinvited from panels for it. I mean, he paid a professional cost for it, and that can't be ignored. And I watched that the truth prevailed. I watched that his argument ultimately became the dominant argument, but he had to make it when it wasn't. And so there's a level, this marathon versus sprint thing that you bring up, I think is key, because it is a long distance run we're going on, and there are gonna be moments where you feel like you can't do it and you feel like you can't make it, and people will have you thinking you can't or shouldn't, but you keep going because there's a broader goal, there's a more important goal. And Mike sort of models that for me. And the second thing, I think, is being misunderstood as an intellectual. Any of us who dare to go against the grain intellectually, whether it's writing a memoir, or mixing, invoking memoirs, Brittany Cooper does, or writing about black popular culture in forms that might not be seen as popular, or doing a black feminist trade book in the 90s like Joan, or you know what I'm saying, or being engaged with French. I didn't even know black people spoke French. This is the kind of stuff that some folk is saying. Obviously I know that, but there's a way that engaging in these different traditions you can be looked upon with skepticism. And all of us have had moments where people have misunderstood our work, our intent, our politics, our goals, but we kept going because we loved black folk, but also we knew the work was worth doing. And Mike taught me, sometimes you got to forgive people in advance. That they might not understand your work for 10 years, 20 years, 30, you might be dead before they really appreciate what you're doing, right? But the work mattered. And so you have to shake those haters off and keep going, even if they don't appreciate it, even though you're still working and serving them, the very people who are hating on, you're creating space for those same people. So for me, that's what Mike's example, his legacy, his life represents, his work, his continued work. He ain't going home to the Lord yet. What his continued work represents.
Thank you for that, Mark. So at this point, I'm sure Mr. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson is probably tired of being out there on the balcony and not participating. And so, at this point, I just feel like it's about time for me to kick it over. This has been a blast. This has been a wonderful conversation with you panelists, and I appreciate you all being here and offering all the remarks that you have. Without further ado, it is my pleasure and my honor to introduce the indomitable, audaciously provocative, the Black Visionary honoree of the 2020 Langston Hughes Festival, Michael Eric Dyson.
Wow, I am I am nearly speechless, honestly. I want to thank Professor Valdez. I want to thank her and Sister Gina Bonilla for bringing me forth in this manner and acknowledging my work amidst a field of thinkers and writers, poets, essayists, novelists, and magicians of the word, both Namos and Logos in those traditions. And I want to thank, City College. I want to thank you for offering me covenant and partnership with the great Langston Hughes, one of whose poems serves as an epigraph for my next book, one who has consistently inspired me. And I think about the great Arnold Rampersaad's majestic 2-volume biography that gave me such deep and profound insight into this incredible figure. So what an honor it is to receive a medal that James Baldwin and Toni Morrison and Ralph Ellison and Rita Dove have received. And if there were those who would cry, he's undeserving, I would be the first to echo your amen. But I'm deeply honored and profoundly moved by the gesture of recognition. And for that, I am so grateful. And to Professor Bobby Derivel for this wonderful moderation of this extraordinary collection of scholars and thinkers and activists and rhetoricians and magicians of the word, and my deep and profound friends. I ain't really got much to say except a profound thank you to all of them. I did not know. I knew that Brittany Cooper is a prophet and preacher. I just didn't know it was formal now. In the streets, we talk about it as bootleg. You ain't nothing but a bootleg Baptist preacher anyhow. And we mean that with affection, by the way. But when gender is intertwined in that recognition, what is meant as an encomium could be a subversive, iteration. We don't want to do that. She is a stone cold great preacher. I was on the stage with her at Essence when she was turning it out. Imagine joining the rhetorical majesty of a C.O. Franklin with Nuck If You Buck. I mean, she was doing it. I mean, I was like, well, damn, that's some next level. And to have that kind of acuity of mind, the majesty of the intellectual horizon over which she commands a noble presence, and one so young who has been willing to share her knowledge with the world. And the reason I called my literary agent, the great Tanya McKinnon, and wrote to her is because I'm reading her writing about everything from Beyonce and how easy it is to just dump on Beyonce, right? Before a certain moment of recognition where she, with the death of Michael Jackson, becomes the greatest entertainer in the world, and people not wanting to give her due, like she was born doing that. Like everybody who just works a little bit can get up and do that, not recognizing the genius of what she was and is. And reading and writing in such a powerful fashion and able to command the highest level of intelligence and intellectual engagement, and then yet present that for an audience that has none of that training and none of those skills and yet who understand the stakes. And to have her kick it off and talk about that prophetic funk, I love that. That P-Funk, I really like that. To be part of that tradition is amazing. Now, from one of its greatest exponents, her, and then the fact that she got the official ordination, got to be more careful. That's she's been preaching all along. So I'm waiting for that singular homiletical moment where she can articulate a litany and catalog of both possibility and of course limit. I can't wait for that moment. The Reverend Dr. Brittney Cooper. That's that is worth a hallelujah for sure. And then Marc Lamont Hill, man, you know, I feel, and y'all forgive me because I'm old school Negro. You know, when I call y'all my babies, I mean no diminution. I mean no disrespect, because everybody can see every one of y'all is genius, right? And that word is overused, and it's certainly gotten a discount when a guy calls himself a stable genius. But you know, I'll leave that for other moments. But the level of command here, it's clear to all of y'all. Well, why would Dyson invest? Oh, we see why, right? It ain't take me long for Mark Hill to say that boy is different. Okay, that ain't no regular Negro, right? When he comes to me and talks to me, and I say, "Yep, let's do it," and then I see him, I invite him to give a lecture in class. He's killing the lecture. He's intellectually curious, and it was an honor to support him because I knew he was already on his way to somewhere that he didn't even understand the greatness that he possessed, right? And I feel that about every person on this panel. I really do. And I had that opportunity to offer a little bit to support him, because how ignorant does that department look right now? Right? If you, it's like Nas dropped out in 8th grade because he didn't feel supported by the school. Who's at fault? Nas or the school? Who looks like a genius? Nas or the school? You don't even know the school Nas went to. We don't even know the name of it. But we know Nasir Jones. 8th grade, it's only right that I was born to use mics, and the stuff that I write is even tougher than dice. We know that, but we don't know where he came from, right? In that sense, we know the hood. We know 40 side. So, you know, Marc Lamont Hill has been an extraordinary figure who has, along with everybody else, pushed me. I remember in class one day, he spit that line from Jay that I had never heard. I'm from the place where the churches are the flakiest. Niggas been praying to God so long that they atheists. So I grabbed him after class. I said, where that from? Where is that? And then he told me, and I said, well, dadgum. I said, because this dude is, you know, because the Jay Nas debate, I was a straight Nas man. No disrespect to Jigga. I mean, Nas is still one of the greatest geniuses that form has ever produced. But I hadn't been given the kind of requisite attention, ironically enough, to Jay. And so it was Marc Lamont Hill, James Braxton Peterson, you know, Negroes with 3 names, gave me a sense of what that capacity was, right? And along with Mike Render, Killer Mike, when they pushed me, it's like, yo, we're used to you being generous and insightful and stuff. You're not really paying attention to Jay in that way. So it's because of Mark Hill and James Peterson and Killer Mike that I began to think about that. And I got a good book out of it. You know, I got a good book out of it. And a friendship with Beyonce's man. So what's interesting is that, and he doesn't mind, he said in his own song, when you're married to a woman who's more famous than you are, he knows what it is, right? He knows what it is. But Jay's rhetorical genius, of course, is undeniable. But Marc Lamont Hill's capacity as such a young person to both grasp hold of an intellectual tradition that not a lot of young people were conversant with, right? when you hear of Brittney Cooper and you read her first book, right? We know about all the famous eloquent rage she got, but when you read her genealogical, both the kind of majestic interstitial engagement with the Foucaultian and Nietzschean conception, really, it's more Nietzschean than even Foucaultian at that level, and then joined to, you know, a kind of Anna Julia Cooper conception of what the intellectual project is about. And then I turned to, you know, I'm talking to Marc Lamont Hill, and I'm saying this dude is reading so widely and deeply without ostentation, right? Because some people do it just to prove, you know, hey, I know these people in the Frankfurt School, and most people don't know the difference between the Frankfurt School and the Frankfurter, and that's cool. But for him to bring it to the people, you know, to understand what that might mean, to engage him, and to see him sink so deeply into that tradition, and you know, he could have had it easy being a pretty boy. You know, he could have just got over. You know, they'd have been like, well, damn, he's pretty to look at. He ain't got to really just be a little bit smart. That's why I'd be trying to tell my son, Negro, there's a lot of pretty Negroes out here. All right. And speaking of which, and I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but I was in Harlem one night where Mark Anthony Neal was gushing over Brittney Cooper. I ain't trying to put no rumors out there. He's safely married. She's good. But I'm just telling you, I heard my man straight up. Right. I was like, is that permissible? Wait a minute. I'm not sure. This is right. Gushing over her in not an intellectual fashion. So, so the thing is that he could have relied on all that, the good looks God gave him, and his comfort in the world with other people, but he worked harder and he dug deeper. And he was able to both appreciate a tradition that came before him and carve out his own space. And like with all the folk on this panel, they did stuff. I remember Mark Hill, after he graduated, got his PhD, was the first person I knew. I'm talking about personally, right? He came back, he was on Fox TV. I was like, yeah, okay, I've been on TV since I've been a kid, dog, I ain't, you know. And he said, I got paid. I said, slow down, wait, hold on. You getting paid for being on TV? Like television? Like they're giving you money, like that's legal, not under the cover, not under the table. So he was the first person I knew. I was like, well, damn, you could be a contributor to the thing, because they wasn't sharing that with Negroes widely, right? And so as an intellectual, he was taking that thing to another level and engaging them and fighting with Bill O'Reilly and them and Sean Hannity, sweet enough as a person to engage them on a level that they could understand and comprehend as humanity, but sharply engaging them and resisting to them. That is a particular kind of talent. And then you would think a guy like that wouldn't be as sharp on the intellectual stage and in the academic arena, but he is. So people mistake it. They think because you do that easily, you can't do this. You see Brittney Cooper on television, you thinking, well, damn, you know, we see her on MSNBC, just deconstruction, just demolishing people. And then you go back and, but damn, the work is superior and sophisticated too. So you see Mark Hill up there talking on Fox News, and then you go back, well, this dude is writing in his texts and in his books. And if you read his most recent book, it's so beautiful. I mean, the translation of Foucault in terms of spectacle and what he does in terms of Black death is damn genius. So to have, you know, that possibility of supporting him even a little bit has been an especial delight, and the text messages and the calls and so on and so forth has been so beautiful. So much more to say, but I won't embarrass him and tell all the stuff he said. But Joan Morgan, man, I remember that day, Joan Morgan. And see, Joan Morgan, to me, when, and you know, it was, look at my lineup of my TAs. I had Mark Lamont Hill, James Braxton Peterson, and Salome Shatilla. You know, I felt like Jay-Z with his wife. You know, he don't even finish the sentence in his Meek Mill verse, one of the coldest verses he ever did, right? Where they're riffing off the Biggie beat on Meek Mill's newest album, where Jay-Z is dropping mad lyricism about 3/5 human clause in the Constitution. And he says, my stuff is better than yours. And he says, my spouse. He don't even finish spouse. He can't even finish. He said, my spot, come on, man. That's what he said. My spot, come on, man. He ain't got to finish it because you know it's Beyonce, and you know beyond the hottest chick in the game wearing my chain, you know a kind of Hegelian world historical figure has descended in the body of a Houston Black woman in a ward that has been demonized next to it. She wasn't from that ward, just next to it. So her adjacent engagement with Black poverty, but the absorption into her own body of that culture is an act of translation that Roland Barthes would have to bow down before. But Joan Morgan, to me, I wasn't just saying that. She was a first-rate intellectual. And so I heard stuff today. That's the reason, the beautiful thing about this, I'm learning stuff I ain't never knew, right? And so hearing Joan Morgan, who for me was doing such cutting edge frontline work. The reason I invited her to the University of Pennsylvania, because she was brilliant and she was smart. And that book was so powerful, beautifully written, poetically intense, evoking a world where Black girls and Black women, before it was popular, before it was the thing to do. And so I wasn't going to stand by and feel the dismissal. I wasn't going to let her become a ventriloquist for her enemies, right? To cycle, because all of us do, right? We're just repeating what somebody told us. First-rate intellectual, right? People all over the country. You got PhDs before she got one reading her stuff, teaching her stuff. She's teaching the very folk who may look askance, right? She's teaching them how to do the stuff, how to translate the stuff, and on the front line, and such a beautiful spirit. I mean, we know the pulchritudinous characteristics that constitute the cheekbones. We understand that, right? We understand what that might mean, right? And it's interesting that Mark Anthony Neal has a relationship both to his gushing over Brittney Cooper. No lie, I'm just letting you know that I heard. I ain't starting no rumors. I'm telling you what I saw. And it was at what was it, Red Rooster? What's the name of that place? In Harlem, right? Mark Anthony Neal know what I'm talking about. I ain't putting you out on Front Street. And acknowledging his homegirl, Joan Morgan. And so to understand the difficulty of articulating an idea, coming up with a book, calling yourself a feminist when it wasn't popular to do at that level. Yes, Bell Hooks is writing Michelle, what is the Black Macho and the Myth of the Superman, Superwoman, I'm sorry. So that we have a great pedigree of feminist theory that's being expressed, but the lacuna for hip hop culture and a vast array of people who are thinking, she immediately filled that gap. And it was a difficult thing to do because you got skepticism from both sides. Hip hop ain't interested at all in no kind of critical self-reflection, no introspection, no internalized self-reflection on the nature of gender, because gender is not just introduced when you introduce women. I mean, dog, you got a gender too. Men are not used to thinking about gender like white folk ain't used to think about race. Well, race, that must be the black or brown or red or yellow. No, it's you. So men, when we talk about men, we're already talking about gender, right? This is before toxic masculinity was a thing. This is before we were speaking about it in such enlightened way. And what Joan Morgan does in that book is she manages to appreciate the genius of the Black men whose flaws she must reveal in order to get them connected to the source of the genius from which they draw. Man, that's work. And so for us to be able to celebrate her and to write a letter and to do whatever else we did, because we understood that class, Mark, Salamisha, and Peterson, we understood what she is, what she was, and the skill level she possesses. And it's going to be a joy to see her break forth in more song academically and do that thing. I mean, the Lauryn Hill joint is off the hook. And I've been waiting. You know, what I love about all of these people on this panel, I read their work because I learn from them. I help a little bit, just a little bit, help produce these folks so I can take advantage of their genius, right? It's very selfish in a fundamental way. And so Joan Morgan, God bless you for that. My man, Mark Anthony Neal. Now, I must say, when he made that Black college comment, Brittany Cooper was about to smack me all the way until you broke it all down further. She's about to punch me, bro. And I was like, oh no, I wanted to say, no. I was saying that at a particular moment, because I started at Knoxville College, 2 years, all my kids, Morehouse, Spelman, and Hampton. My younger son, right, went to 5 Negro colleges. 5, dog. I might as well have been Lou Rawls because I was a one-man United Negro College Fund. And that Negro, like somebody else on this panel, being pretty boy, thinking, I was like, look, Negro, you got to study. What the hell? You ain't gonna go up in there and be pretty. You got to be pretty smart. And so he caught on eventually. And I put that Negro through 5 different times in a HBCU school. So, you know, Mark Anthony Neal, when I met him, and he's in that institution, and we know Black on Black crime has been hyper visibilized in a pathological fashion. And we know that the very creation of the term misses the geographical and demographic specificity that characterizes Jews, Italians, Poles, and the Irish when they came here, late 1800s, early 1900s. That's why they call it the paddy wagon, a racial ethnic epithet attached to a particular police wagon that drug the drunken Irish from their colloquies in the hood, in the shtetl, in the ghetto that Jews occupied before Black folk did, and took them into police custody. So we know the funkiness of that. People kill where they live. People commit crime where they live. The contiguous characteristics of the demographics that are besieged by hurt and pain have nothing to do with your racial or ethnic origin and have to do with where you live and where you're cooped up and what you do. Not that we're not concerned about Black people who kill Black people or hurt Black people, but some of the greatest Black on Black crime happens in the academy, right? It happens in the academy. And sometimes it happens. And I saw this brilliant young guy. I sat next to him, right? My girl, Vanessa Bell Calloway, and her sister there. So when she tells me this is a sharp young man, I'm sitting there talking to him and I'm saying he's breaking it down. How you, dude, this young knows something about Little Willie John from Detroit, Michigan. How, I knew he was special then. I said, Little Willie John? He know about Little Willie John that Jesse Jackson went to visit in prison, right? A lot of people don't know that early on. So Little Willie John, little sawed off dude, little Wayne kind of dude, Little Wayne predecessor, right? Went for bad, except he was really bad. Not, rather be underground pushing flowers than in the pen sharing child. No, he was before that, right? The Little Willie John, who was one of the greatest voices of the 20th century, latter half of the 20th century with the blues and the R&B aesthetic. And he's sitting there telling me all this stuff. And I was like, damn, this dude really he's got a command already. So when he gave me the dissertation, I figured, well, I'll read the first couple pages. I'm gonna go and knock off. I was like, well, damn, I'm on page 10. Okay, I'm on page 15. And I ain't gonna read it unless I got some time. But I had some time. So I said, page 20. Then I read that whole damn dissertation. I had to call him up at 2 o'clock. I had to call my girl, what's your man's number there? What's your man's number? And called him up and I said, bruh, yeah, you putting in some serious work here. So to see his level of genius, to appreciate what he was doing, and not taking the obvious, right? He could have been doing this, the hip hop stuff and all that. He's doing the R&B stuff. I mean, the stuff that we all love, because every now and again I'll go, I need Mark Anthony Neal to weigh in on this for me, to make me understand, so I'll know what I'm thinking, right? Because every one of them, Joan Morgan, Mark Lamont Hill, Brittany Cooper, I don't know what I'm thinking until I read them and I go, oh, that's what I'm thinking. That's what it is, because they name it for me. They help me understand what it is I'm grappling with. And so Mark Anthony Neal, I mean, reading his work has been a treasure trove of analysis and understanding, and the way in which he's done the kind of archival work, getting, the excavatory work of trying to get deep into these people's lives and meanings and musics that were not necessarily as popular as other musics were, but to make them understandable, to render them, quote, legible. And then at the same time, have the capacity to link that to the hip hop stuff was downright beautiful. And to understand the beauty of soul and the persona that he embodies as a scholar who is committed to loving our people like all of these scholars are, it's been an extraordinary thing. And to see him coming from where he came from, right? Not at no Ivy League school, right? Him and Joan Morgan, he used to talk about Joan Morgan all the time, him and Drum, from their place. And then for him now to be at Duke University, every time the James B. Duke, Houghton potentate, Fred Flintstone professor of, what he's doing is extraordinary. And that's a come up. And the thing is, and I think about this when I talk to Mark, Lamont Hill, and Brittany Cooper, and Joan Morgan, and you, Mark Anthony Neal, I think about the prodigal son. And and Brittany Cooper could preach this one day, that, just like Benjamin Elijah Mays, the poor president of the school that Mark Lamont Hill went to there, Benjamin Elijah Mays had a sermon about be kind to Judas. And he broke down why you ought to be understanding of what Judas did. Look at the context, look at the temptation, look at what he was after, look at his economic deprivation and so on and so forth. And so I want to say, be kind to all these rappers talking about they went out and they sold drugs and slang raw and pushed dimes and pushed weight. And then they got Jesus, they got converted, they met Allah, they got, read the Tao Te Ching or the Bhagavad Gita, the Holy Quran, the Bible, and they got converted. And then they came back to where we is and where we never left. Like, there's something to be said for, I'm glad it took you selling drugs, destroying your community. Yes, Biggie, this is for all the people who called the police because because you were like destroying their community. I love you, but damn. What? So the thing is, and I'm glad, but what is not mentioned is that he was mentored by the great jazz musician was it Donald Harrison, who taught him to swing, who made him sit down and listen to jazz chords. And that's why Biggie, B-I-G, B-O-P-P-A, no info. The artist formerly known as Mos Def told me, the mathematician of flow. But the reason is that you did all that stuff and now you came back to your senses. Look at every one of these figures up here who could have been tempted to do the same thing they did. I ain't crapping on them. My brother spent 30 years in a hellhole. He used to slang crack. He sold drugs. He did a lot of horrible things. I don't believe he was guilty of the murder for which he was convicted by an all-black jury and sent to prison for his life. But still, I saw the conversion. I saw what he became. And I'm saying, for these folk, all of whom could have done some of the nefarious stuff that we read about in the papers, that they stayed true to it and they saw it from the beginning. So when we talk about prescience, let's acknowledge that all these folk on this panel could have made a different choice and a different decision to become something different. I'm not demonizing those folks. I'm not engaging in a kind of ontological obfuscation of their inherent worth on an ethical and moral meaning. But I'm just trying to say that these folk right here made a choice that from the very beginning was even more difficult because it was harder. They didn't get immediate money. They didn't get the immediate payoff of the drugs or the flow. They didn't get the people chasing them and acknowledging them as cultural heroes because they were able to blow up in an underground economy. Please don't miss the extraordinary sacrifice that has to be made in order to become who they are. And so Mark Anthony Neal represented that for me as well. And then finally, Tracy Sharpley Whiting, speaking of which, from St. Louis, St. Lunatic, right? Before Nelly, she put St. Louis on before Nelly came along. And what's the comedian? What's my man's name? What's your boy's name? Cedric the Entertainer. and some other, you know, St. Louis arches. But I remember that that we worked out a deal when I met her at Brown University. I'm there at Brown, and this tall, striking, you see her, she ain't changed much in 30 years. She looking the same. She just, you know, she got more degrees and fame and stuff, but she was a striking figure, not just physically. You can see she was a runway model. You can tell by the elan vital, the grace with which she operated within her own space. She understood self-possession, but she was a feminist, articulating her ideas and battling against the diminution of her persona, even as she embraced the possibilities that were inherent in the recognition of who she was. And to see that kind of complexity at such a young age, and then she gave a lecture in the class, killing the folk, because all the little boys were like, no, calm down, son, just sit down, sit on back now. And all, you know, what they say, the boys liked her and the girls wanted to be her, right? That kind of presence, that kind of charisma in a Weberian sense, yeah, but also in a straight up, you know, hood sense. The swagger, hood, I guess hood charisma is called swag. And so for her to have that and be willing to do the work, and then speaking the French, it's like Mark Hill said, you know, like, well, we know it, but it's one thing to know it intellectually, but to hear a Black person, je parle pas de français, yeah, and she's just killing them with the French, though. She's just killing them with the French. Like, I'm sorry. And that ain't about, for those who are Anglophiles, who genuflect before the altar of a European conception, she's getting inside like Samson to deconstruct it, you know? And so that Fanonian moment that she was the avatar for, but in a different way, because Fanon is to the nature born. She's learning this language up out of St. Louis, and mastering that discourse, that dialogue, that language, and then going inside to do that work up in the masses' house, man. And this is with the great Audre Lorde, I've always had an asterisk for me that sometimes it takes the master's tools, but you using them to deconstruct the master's house. And I know her point was, you can't use it the same way the master does, and she's absolutely right. But you got to seize upon the same thing. Everybody up here speaks the King's English to the Queen's taste, has done their thing, going out in public, and then bringing home, so to speak, that Black reality that cannot be denied. And for Tracy Sharpley Whiting, I knew from the very beginning, when I knew her before she was Tracy Sharpley Whiting, she was just Tracy Sharpley at that point. Much respect to Gilman. What up, brother? So the thing is to see that kind of intellectual brilliance, and she was with those 3 TAs there, and she was just lapping them, and they were all smart, but she's just killing the game, just intellectually investing, because some people brought a kind of prejudice against her because of the way she looked. And let's be real, dark-skinned Black men who were beautiful, Denzel, Wesley Snipes, even though I was saying after, you know, they ain't nobody was fawning over Wesley when he was on Michael Jackson's Bad. I mean, I'm just saying, yeah, all right. So we know the social construction of desire and the social production of want, right? But Wesley is, I mean, as beautiful as that boy is. But here was a woman, right? Dark-skinned Black men and light-skinned Black women, right? Had the kind of unlimited run on the marquee of racial appetites, right? But dark-skinned Black women were in a different story. Brown-skinned Black women were in a different story. I seen it with my own eyes. My daddy was blue-Black from Albany, Georgia, and I saw how Negroes treated him. Right, assuming, oh, Everett. I remember once working in a pharmacist. We were working because my father got laid off, trying to do everything but go on welfare. And the white owner of the store, oh, Everett, you're such a boy. Now, my daddy used to beat our asses, man. I mean, for a lot of stuff. And I thought he was going to kill this white man. And he came out that letter and without a word. And so I saw what he was doing, sacrificing, not to hurt this man in order to continue to provide for his family, in order that we would have a way that he didn't have. Daddy could barely read or write. Dropped out in 4th grade somewhere, maybe, forced to work. And so seeing how that colorism played a role, to see the way in which dark-skinned Black women did not have, brown-skinned Black women did not have a kind of entree that was afforded even dark-skinned Black men. And to see her handle both the resentment and skepticism about who she was just on a kind of, looksism, and then to just come in and wreck shop intellectually by commanding attention through the discursive formations that she studied in European intellectual history, and then broke that stuff down for everyday Negroes. Think about all that. Think about what went into Pimps Up and Hoes Down. So I knew from the very beginning she was especially sharp. And so now for her to be my boss lady and to hire me back at Vanderbilt, when I come hat in hand begging for, can you please hire a Negro? And she said, young man, I think I'll do you a solid here. But for her to be the cultural figure that she is now, both in the academy and more broadly, has been a beautiful manifestation of promise I saw in 1992. And so for all of the folk here, I'm just so honored. I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful for your own genius, for allowing me just a little bit of an opportunity to help in the shaping of your lives. I used to not understand when people would say, I want to thank my child for allowing me to be their mama or their daddy. But I want to thank these brilliant geniuses for allowing me the opportunity to have anything to do with y'all and to have my name associated with y'all, because what you have brought to me substantively and personally is beautiful. So I'm thankful. I'm grateful for this extraordinary opportunity, and thank God again to the wonderful Professor Valdez and her committee, and Sister Gina Bonilla, my former student at Columbia, whose recommendation to this committee, who then took it very seriously and gave me such love. I'm deeply and profoundly honored by and grateful for. It's a lot more I could say, but let me shut up. Thank y'all so very much. Love every one of y'all. And y'all made me cry today. So thank you. Thank you so kindly.
I want to thank all of you. I want to thank this panel for just sharing all of your love. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, for all that you are, all that you do. In every space, we have heard testimony today of your just not only brilliance, but generosity of spirit and just being as extraordinary as you are. I invite everyone to join us for our 6 o'clock ceremony, where we will hear once again from our honoree. Thank you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.